We've had repeated instances of something operating in the airspace over restricted nuclear facilities, and it's not ours.
They have both deactivated and activated nuclear weapons with both the United States and Russia.
These are otherworldly things that are performing maneuvers that haven't been seen.
The UAP activity surrounding nuclear weapons is not a historic issue. It's an ongoing issue.
Hi folks, good to be with you. I'd like to do a quick recap and react to the Age of Disclosure documentary that just went public last Friday here in November 2025. I've only seen it once. I haven't looked at a lot of other analysis or critique or anybody else's recap videos. So these are my first and initial thoughts, which I'm still forming. But I wanted to put this out, highlight some of the key testimony, potential new data points, and the shift in the discourse internal to the UFO community from UAP to NHI, from craft to controller, and this emerging reality and growing fact that not only is there a there with this phenomenon, but there is a they there. There is an intelligence, a sentience, another form of life behind part of this phenomenon, and that is what we need to contend with. So let's dive in. The Age of Disclosure features 34 U.S. government, military, and intelligence insiders, and to my knowledge was developed in relative secrecy over a 3-year period starting in 2022. It was aired at the South by Southwest Film Festival earlier this year in March to a limited audience, and then it went quite dark, and the public never got to see what was going to be, the unveiling of, quote, the Age of Disclosure. So I know there was a lot of questioning as to what happened to the film, why didn't it go out publicly, and I'm not quite sure why it took so long to do so myself, but I'm happy to see it finally get aired. Some good things to say. I definitely had my frustrations and disappointments in the film at both the level of its narration and its narrative arc, as well as the contents of the film, what it featured and what was presented. But I do feel that this film is a valuable, next step in shifting the conversation into a more legitimate mainstream discourse. The film argues for the existence of an 80-year cover-up of the existence of non-human intelligence and a multi-decade, multi-nation secret arms race over the reverse engineering of technologies of non-human origin. It presents testimony regarding long-standing crash retrieval efforts, the, quote, legacy program, the efforts to recover these crashed vehicles and reverse engineer them, and the problems of a lack of elected government oversight of this reality, the overclassification of information, and the repression and reprisals against whistleblowers, all very valuable topics. So let's dive into the film and some high points, and as well as some pain points for myself. So I did find the film presented a new set of convincing voices and some compelling statements of the reality of not just UAP as a technology in the air or in the ocean, but as an intelligently controlled technology, an intentful technology. I noted comments by former Congressman Gallagher, Congressman Carson, and Ogles, clear-minded, stating the real hazards and risks that this phenomenon is posing and the urgent challenge facing decision makers to contend with its reality, to get out there and understand the nature of the phenomenon and what it's doing. I appreciated those comments. Interestingly, Rep. Gallagher reframed the options for what could be behind this phenomenon. We've heard it said many different ways. It could be prosaic, it could be foreign adversary, etc. Well, he framed it in the following 4-option multi-choice question. Is it foreign adversary? Is it a robust counterintelligence program to cover a U.S. government that has fallen away from congressional oversight? Is it interdimensional extraterrestrial? Or option 4, a combo of those three? And often when there's a fourth option to pick all of the above, that is often the right one, especially with a phenomenon like this. So some interesting presentation of kind of the overall challenge posed by the phenomenon. I thought also there was an impactful presentation of the now 6 observables. I'll put these up on screen here. This is taken right out of the direct text of the UAP Disclosure Act. I had not noted that the sixth observable was placed in the text directly: physical or invasive biological effects to close observers and the environment. In fact, one of the speakers, Flaherty was his last name, presented or described a 25% mortality rate within 7 years of interaction, saying, quote, "This is more than just an aerial phenomenon." I think that goes without saying, but really acknowledging the direct, hard human impacts of not just UAP, but, and as we'll get into, the deeper in encounters that have taken place. I thought there was also just some moderately good, not quite sufficient, but good enough description of the capabilities of UAP, what are described as asymmetric capabilities and the increased risk of strategic surprise. Ryan Graves noted how in one instance an object was seen loitering in a fixed position in 125 knot winds, essentially in the middle of a hurricane. That's quite a capability. Speeds of 40,000 miles per hour were noted. I've heard estimates of over 100,000 miles per hour in certain detectable UAP cases. Lou Elizondo noted that the SR-71 takes roughly half the state of Ohio to complete one turn, whereas a UAP can undertake an instantaneous 90-degree turn. And David Frazier talked about, the 7.5 G-forces that a typical plane and pilot can withstand. And of course, as we know, UAP are observed to undertake maneuvers in the 1 to 2 to 3,000 G-force range. And then Eric Davis, I thought this was a good way to describe it, described the UAP propulsion energy requirements as 100 times the daily power generated in the United States, 1.1 billion kilowatts, I believe it was. Fact check me on that. So, I mean, these are numbers the public can begin to consider and to use to understand the scope of the phenomenon and the truly non-human origin of its technology. So these are truly asymmetric capabilities. As for strategic surprise and the hard impacts of the phenomenon, Ryan Graves noted one instance in which two military jets were flying in formation, close formation, and a UAP shot right between them, causing a near collision, if not with the UAP, between the two jets. I thought that was important to bring forward because it's often described as a remote, observational, relatively benign aerial phenomenon, UAP, when really UAP are tracking aircraft, they are chasing them, they are performing high-risk maneuvers, hundreds of feet, in some cases, from civilian airliners loaded with passengers, well within the pocket, the safe pocket that any civilian airliner would need to function. So there is high-risk activity going on in our skies. And so this problem of flight safety is a real one. And then we get into the problem of ground safety, right, which is close approaches to observers on the ground. And, Dr. Gary Nolan spoke to some of the health impacts of close encounters with UAP. In fact, there was a firsthand medical witness to this. I lost his name. It's somebody can help me with that, who had a direct encounter with a UAP with very deleterious impacts to his health. So I thought that was a very important reality. And I think Marco Rubio summed it up pretty well, that the unforeseen, what I've never seen before, what keeps me up at night is the unforeseen, what I've never seen before, the problem of strategic surprise. Okay, so some good narrative presentation of the flight characteristics and performance capabilities of UAP. Some good broad brushstrokes for the general public to understand the nature of what is transiting our skies. I thought a lot more could have been done here to flesh out the capabilities of UAP, to give real shape and dimensions, present some hard data, present possibly, if available, some new and original media, video, photo, or radar tracks, other data sets to the public to show them, look, this is data-driven, this is data-based. And in the closing parts of the film, Harry Reid talked about how do they prevent this from coming out? Well, you attack people who are based on facts. And so I felt like the film could have done a better job to back up testimony with facts, because there is so much evidence that is not testimonial in nature to back up the reality of the phenomenon. Okay, now I'd like to talk about non-human intelligence, because I felt this film was a notable leap forward from prior lines of discourse where you introduce UAP and you posit various potential origins for these craft and the intelligence piloting. Is it us? Is it a black budget program? Is it foreign adversary? Is it unacknowledged natural aerial phenomenon? They went right to, this is intelligently controlled by a non-human intelligence, right there. I thought that was a forward step beyond the prior lines, demarcating the safe zone for the discourse, especially for those who have been on the program, who are governed by non-disclosure agreements, and in many cases have stated very clearly they cannot say what they think about the origin, the nature, and the biology of these potential entity controllers. But in this film, I heard more of it, and I was actually pleasantly surprised that the film delivered on that little 4-second snippet from Jay Stratton reading off the teleprompter, I have seen with my own eyes non-human craft and non-human beings. Part of me wondered if that was just about as far as the film would go. Was that the high watermark? And I was surprised. There were multiple mentions of, quote, the bodies of non-humans. Non-human bodies in the legacy program's possession. 4 bodies recovered at Roswell. Bodies recovered, not all of the same kind, not all of the same species. These are the kinds of statements made in the film. I also want to note that David Grush, who was featured in the film and of course has done a tremendous amount to really anchor us in some of the most important variables of the phenomenon in his 2023 testimonial contribution in front of Congress regarding biologics, right? David Grush went on Fox News a few days after the drop of the film. I'd like to show you a clip of that and just highlight some of the statements he made.
You believe that we have encountered alien beings and that they've come to Earth and that we know about it as a U.S. government?
That seems to be the case. I don't like to characterize necessarily where they came from. They're definitely some kind of non-human sentience, but it is true, believe it or not, we've recovered the vehicles and we actually have physical proof. And I was actually partially cleared into some of those activities. It was beyond oral testimony provided to me. I actually had partial access to the data and actually read the intelligence reports resulting from those programs.
Like with your own eyes,
correct.
You saw it.
Yes. There is this biological sentience that have piloted these crafts that don't necessarily look 100% like you and I.
Were there pictures? Were there?
There were. Yes, there were. We have been in arms race with our peer competitors, namely Russia and China, and they have their own programs in this regard. And I was actually able to view a body of intelligence that discussed adversarial programs, and I'll leave it at that.
We're going beyond just, craft craft containing biologics, right? What could that mean? Remains, human or non-human, something recovered inside the vehicle, right? Now we're talking about a biological sentience piloting these craft, right? This is another forward step into the unknown domain and terrain of the intelligence aspect of the phenomenon, the intelligent biological controller. Interesting, I believe in the film, Eric Davis mentioned biological evidence of living or deceased non-human intelligence was actually mentioned in the UAP Disclosure Act. And I had missed that. So I went and hunted down all the references to what he was describing. And I found 4 references to, quote, living or deceased non-human intelligence. All of them were put forward in the context of any description of the legacy program. And most interestingly, in terms of the Presidential Review Board and other roles that might have arisen from the UAPDA, which unfortunately did not pass and will not come into full being. Anyone entering a role associated with the UAPDA and the legislation that it put in place has to demonstrate that they have not been a part of any program dealing with living or deceased non-human intelligence. If that's not a sign, a solid anchor in the reality of what is, right, and then designing a response plan accordingly in terms of what roles are put in place, who enters those roles, and how to safeguard those roles from penetration by the very program that is guarding the secrets of that reality. That I would say is one, living or deceased non-human intelligence. There were some eye-openers as well in this documentary, some notable drops. And of course, we've all in the UFO community and elsewhere have heard some of these cases described before, but for myself, not on a stage like this and not in a narrative media presentation, which seemed very much focused on federal decision makers, the legacy program itself, and the mainstream media. Okay, so I've heard cases like these described at UFO conferences, on podcasts, etc., but not on a stage like this. And several of these are from Eric Davis, who seemed very willing to go above and beyond certain set lines to add real shape and dimension to our understanding of what this vague concept of NHI might mean. 1964, Holloman Air Force Base, 3 UAP landed, a non-human entity deboarded, and interacted with Air Force and CIA personnel. 1989, the Soviets recovered a tic-tac-shaped craft with 4 bodies of humanoid aliens on board. And then this is the real interesting one. Soviet scientists took apart the craft and discovered an advanced directed energy weapon. Think about that for a moment. Did they discover a weapon on board the craft, a weapon system? Did they discover a weapon targeting them? Were they targeted with a weapon when entering the craft? Or did they just recover technologies that could be used to develop a directed energy weapon? To my knowledge, there is a strong line of connection between DEW, directed energy weapon, high pulse microwave beam weaponry, and UAP, as well as the crash recovery program. And I look forward in the months and years ahead to gaining greater insight into the exact nature of that connectivity. The film at that point also cut to some footage of a speech by John F. Kennedy from 1962 saying there are new technologies to be won. Interesting. And technology has no conscience of its own. And of course, the film, as it would have to, cut to the UN speech by Ronald Reagan regarding the potential unifying power of the recognition of an alien force. Interesting historic drops. I think, this key reality that we're dealing with a secret arms race over technologies of non-human origin, but one that goes back in time to the late 40s, early 50s, makes you really wonder about our understanding of the Cold War, the cold conflict between the Soviets and the Americans. To what extent was recovery and reverse engineering, weaponization, as well as interaction and deal-making with a potential set of NHI, a part of what fueled that conflict, part of what may have led to the thawing of relations as both nation states realized the challenge before them and the need to collaborate. And then, as we understand, the death of not just JFK, but Robert Kennedy and other big thinkers and activists of that time who were arguing for a human framework for dealing with the challenges of the nuclear age, of the technology age, the data age, etc. Was UAP a part of what led to some of those major world events? Important line of questions, I think. I'll also note that Eric Davis dropped a little interesting nugget, which I'm still going to be pondering, which is that there may be an intention on the part of some NHI to intervene and protect and prevent a conflict between us and them. That's interesting. I have heard and seen in various places, come across convincing information to suggest that there's not only multiple factions of NHI present around the Earth human system and in the solar system, but there may be dominant factions and rogue or rebellious ones, and that the two may be at sometimes in competition or conflict, at sometimes in states of collaboration. And you can take that logical steps further to imagine that different factions would seek different human partners, would seek to embed themselves in the world in different ways, utilizing all of the highly convenient fracture lines, divisions, and existing conflicts, leveraging those for their own ends, as well as using a highly uneven degree of technological detection and sensing ability that exists on the Earth to hide their presence. Now, we are sandwiched between two domains of unknowability at this point, space and sea. Tim Gallaudet in The Age of Disclosure described how we have greater spatial resolution of Mars and the moon than we do of the sea floor, or the floor of the oceans of the earth. So here we are, these terrestrial mammals grazing on the surface of this beautiful planet Earth, rich in biology, mineral deposits, and other unique attributes. And we are sandwiched between these two domains in which we have almost no observability. Okay, one of the observables of UAP, low observability. Well, they can do that via possibly cloaking, which is noted in one of the observables, or simply by operating in those domains of unknowability. And so, to make a statement that there may be multiple NHI, that one may intervene to prevent a conflict between us and another, is an interesting dimension to add to this. It suggests to me that we may be stepping into or walking backwards into an exopolitical state of affairs, that there may be proxy conflicts underway, and that some of what we see geopolitically and in terms of the big fight over data, AI, and other emergent technologies, breakthrough energy sources, may be connected to the power play between different NHI factions. Okay, let's talk about the age of cover-up, right? Because if we're entering an age of disclosure, well, what is the age that we are leaving from? And really, I felt this documentary was more about the departure from the prior age than really truly entering the new age. And I'll talk about that in my final remarks. But this documentary did attempt to give some shape to the longstanding cover-up of this phenomenon. Eric Davis made the statement, they don't want to tell anyone about the threat because they can't do anything about it. That's a statement I've heard many, many times before by other government officials. It does suggest that there is a hard set of truths behind disclosure that make it extraordinarily difficult to disclose. I'm actually taking it even beyond what Eric said there, in that, there are things that we can't match them. We don't have technological parity. That's why it's hard to disclose. I think there's actually even harder contents to the disclosures that make it even more challenging. And on that topic, I'll just head right into that kind of observation of disclosure itself. I've been saying for a long time that we have to be asking the question of what is it that will be disclosed? What are the contents of disclosure? Are we disclosing existence of non-human intelligence, presence on Earth, activity among human beings, or intent? Existence, presence, activity, intent. These are different degrees of disclosure. And each degree of disclosure contains different data sets. So which of those is actually going to be disclosed to the public? That's very important. How do you disclose abductions, for example? If it came out to be true that there were human-looking non-humans present on Earth, how would you disclose information regarding that? Right? It's not just you don't have the technological ability to match UAP in the sky. Do you have the technological ability to detect genetic anomalies in the population and trace those back to find out how that anomaly arose and what composition of actors may have played a part in causing that to take place, right? These are, the deeper in silos that go down, 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 down. And, as citizen advocates and activists, we have to inform ourselves and equip ourselves to support society's ontological processing of those extant realities, those existences, right, that are so very difficult. And not just bang on the door of the Pentagon asking them to give us all that they know. There has to be citizen pressure. Okay, so what are we understanding about the shape of the cover-up? Well, interesting little schematic, very simple. I'm sure it's way oversimplified, but in the documentary, an image was put on screen, what you could call a wire chart, lines being drawn between hierarchical superiors and inferiors. And the basic wire chart was that the CIA sits on top of the next order of the cover-up, with the Air Force on the right conducting operations to recover crashed vehicles and much, much more, and the Department of Energy on the left, and then the defense contractors in the middle. And that, over time, oversight of all of those activities has been sucked out of the agencies of the U.S. government and has been repositioned within the defense sector You could call that, I guess, the legacy program. Strange word, by the way. Is it a legacy? Is it still active? And if it's the legacy program, well, what is the modern program? Right? So I look forward to gaining more insight into why that descriptor was chosen. Right? What is the force composition, and how has that shifted over time? Because I don't think it looks the same today as it did 40 years ago. Have we gone from majestic 12 to majestic 24 to something like a majestic 32? Right? And, interesting, in the documentary, Lou shared that there's a committee of 27 individuals that were tasked with silencing he and David Grush. To my knowledge, that's an accurate statement. Not so much the number, I wouldn't have insight into that, but that there were those credible threats to their lives. So how has that changed over time and adapted as technology has grown, as the balance of power on Earth has shifted in a post-World War II, post-Cold War era, especially as we enter a more multipolar world order in which Russia and China have demarcated effectively their spheres of influence, and the influence and power of the Western Liberal Alliance is in decline. I would be interested to know not only how the legacy program has adapted to that, but how the non-human intelligent program has adapted to that. We have to account for both human and non-human factors if we're going to really run this equation and sum it out to something accurate. Okay, so the Air Force is responsible for field operations to secure and retrieve crash UAP. The Air Force coordinates with other branches to obtain the necessary support by special forces. Defense contractors do the reverse engineering, and the DOE has its own security classification system outside the traditional DoD IC classifications and is concerned with anything that gives off radiation. And then I think a statement was made that Air Force OSI had, this was in one particular instance where Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigations, showed up to have everyone sign forms. So I guess that corroborates the overall wireframe that was put on screen. Some interesting statements made. The legacy program is funding and conducting a disinformation campaign. So, it's possible that campaign is being run outside of government. Important to just take that in, lest we make government the bad guy, and begin to degrade trust in authority when really authority has lost oversight, right? And that's the problem. And there is now a fight to regain lawful oversight. And so we need to put faith back in government to do that, okay? Another statement, the legacy program is in a long-standing war with other nations. That's quite a statement, right? So a non-governmental, non-state actor operating in rogue fashion, presumably inside the United States or its various territories and allied national territories, is operating wars against other state actors. So does that suggest that the legacy program has essentially its own military, its own airports, its own aircraft, its own special operations units, right? Is it conducting, campaigns to undermine the leadership of other countries, to engineer coups, to create smear campaigns against foreign politicians, to destabilize foreign governments, akin to what the CIA has traditionally done? So that's quite a statement, that a U.S.-based rogue actor is waging war against other state actors. Is it possible that this is part of the effort to recover crashed vehicles? That if a vehicle crashes, I know the statement was made in the documentary, we prefer it to be in international waters. I thought, I'll bet you do. Because if it's not, it's a little trickier, right? If it's in the suburbs of Moscow, how do you go get the thing? It was also said on the documentary that the director of science and technology at the CIA, that's where you would put the program. Well, fantastic timing, because this Friday I'm going to have Matt Ford and Chris Sharp on Emergent to break down their article from earlier in the year that talks about the Office of Global Access at the CIA and their quite penetrating insights into the nature of the cover-up run out of that agency. So we're going to be getting into that later this week. But in essence, is this the, quote, cabal? It's not a cabal in the conspiratorial sense, but more in an organizational sense. It's a compartmentalized chain of command that spans decades, operates through need-to-know silos, and has kept not only the president and his most immediate responsible staff, but our elected legislative officials, our senators, our congressmen, the Gang of Eight, and others from having any insight into the nature of this, quote, program that is being run globally, that is reverse engineering these technologies and deploying them at scale in the air, and potentially even on populations, either in the form of disinformation campaigns, the use of directed energy weapons, and possibly acts to destabilize foreign governments. The scope and the depth is quite astounding. Some other interesting dimensions were added to this. Jay Stratton talked about how the FAA is intentionally not tracking UAP, that they are tracking only craft that are squawking, putting out intentional signals stating what they are and where they are. And, you know, I had to think back, I immediately did, to the disclosures of Jim Shell on LinkedIn, talking about a control system put in place to limit space domain awareness, to prevent us from seeing, detecting, tracking what's up there or down here. And so as we talk about intentionally installed mechanisms to prevent oversight, it's not just political oversight, it's literal technological sensing and sight, optical sight, radar, electromagnetic, sonar, etc., preventing the detection of the operation of what may ultimately be not only non-human intelligent craft, but reverse engineered alien reproduction vehicles. And that's not just within one government's context or, the U.S. legacy program, but also other programs from other foreign actors. I'll also just mention there's a great film out right now called The House of Dynamite. There is a history of what I would call signaling to the public via the use of mainstream media, film, putting out narratives in kind of wrapped in the paper of Hollywood and the memes and other symbols that kind of drive American society forward. But really at a deeper level, signaling about the nature of the phenomenon. And in the House of Dynamite, basically an intercontinental ballistic missile is launched at a U.S. city. And spoiler alert, the fundamental problem and the fundamental key narrative point in the film is that the acting authorities, Space Missile Command, are unable to discern or detect the origin of the missile and therefore cannot responsibly fire back. Right? So it's the ultimate undermining of deterrence, of mutually assured destruction, which keeps us in a state of not using nuclear weapons, allowing one nation to launch and another nation to not be able to respond. Again, are there control systems being put in place to cripple, to blind intentionally the observing capabilities of our government in my country and other governments? Hal Puthoff in this documentary spoke once again, and he has multiple times, to a George Bush Jr. era private conference hosted, I believe, in the DC Beltway, bringing in academics, scientists, engineers, researchers, policymakers to examine how government can disclose and if they should disclose, basically assessing the ramifications of disclosure across society and scoring, the potential harmful or deleterious impacts of that disclosure. Interesting, in the documentary, they called out how over George Bush Jr.'s ranch, there was considerable UAP activity at one point to the degree that multiple F-16s were scrambled to address it. Okay, so a lot going on back then. Fun fact, and some personal history here, the organization and the director of that organization who called for that conference and organized it, I won't name him, he just passed away. And there's family and children involved, so I'm not gonna put a name on it. But that individual flew out to Colorado to meet my father several years before that conference, and he asked my father what he knew about the phenomenon. What was it? What were its intentions? What was the scenario at play? And for those interested, you can ask Marshall all about that. I'm sure he can share some insight into that. But at the end of that conversation, as my father told me, this individual asked him how he would present this information to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Interesting that several years later, possibly in the 2003, 4, 5 timeline, as the second war in Iraq was getting underway after 9/11, the invasion of northern Iraq. I was actually present in that region at that time. I was in far southeastern Turkey during the escalation, and at the point of invasion, I was actually evacuated from the area because of the invasion of northern Iraq between U.S. and Kurdish forces. So long personal story to tell there, but it was actually at that time that I stepped out into the world because I felt like things were moving. And I intuitively knew that it was in part connected to this issue of the presence of a non-human intelligence. Interesting that that conference happened around that time as potential geopolitical events were heating up and as the U.S. was confronted with what to do about the phenomenon and its potential connectivity to other state actors who were taking other highly dangerous steps and acts to destabilize the state of power in the world. Several years later, I actually ran into one of the individuals, almost ran into, literally, part of, you could call that control system. Those gatekeepers, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, that triad, right? I was just reflecting on this because I saw Condoleezza Rice sitting in the box office seats at a Denver Broncos game, and came to find that she was one of the part owners, I guess, of the Broncos, or involved in some financial way. So I looked it up a little bit, and I recalled that I almost ran into Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, I guess it was. I was on Capitol Hill passing around an information packet to multiple congressional offices on this topic. I stepped out of the congressional building and literally almost ran into Donald Rumsfeld. I did not get a packet into his hands. I so wish I did, although I think if I did, some things might have happened to dissuade me from continuing in my efforts. So in that way, I'm glad I didn't. But just very interesting to see, how that triad, that era of the George Bush Jr. era, is coming kind of back to the fore in this reprise of the concept of federal disclosure. Should we disclose? I wouldn't be surprised if the current administration is asking those same questions, performing those same calculations to assess the risk and the impacts of disclosing this information. And of course, Dick Cheney, who is recently being described, I think even by David Grush, as one of the key gatekeepers, passed away. And so, we're seeing the death of some of those gatekeepers. I don't doubt that new ones have sprung up in their place. But who knows? Maybe just like science, per Max Planck, the field will advance one death at a time. The topic of crash recoveries came up. Hal Puthoff said that maybe, who knows, they're left here, gifts from a more intelligent species, to which I thought, gosh, you think so? You think that might be possible? So few people are willing to entertain the possibility that crash recoveries are not crashes. They're intentionally deposited technologies. They could be Trojan forms of technology, things that we are intended to reverse engineer to bring certain key systems or dependencies into our human technological overall global system, or the seeding of certain key insights that would steer the way we develop technology in a certain new direction. Hal Puthoff described it as a potential species-wide IQ test. Possible. I would question possible. I would question the intention of those doing the test. Why test our IQ? Why drop different forms of technology in different countries for them to reverse engineer and potentially weaponize, right? So what is the intention behind giving different parties different things and really fueling what is now acknowledged to be this secret arms race for technology of non-human origin? Also, I think gift is a bit of a red herring. These truly are strategic assets of an unknown intelligence deposited potentially with intent, but in ways that have not been disclosed. We need to seriously question how exotechnologies are being brought into our human Earth system, deployed at scale, and how they may be exacerbating tensions between countries or even fueling not just arms races for those tech, but arms races over data, AI, and other processes that are inherently powerful in terms of setting up preeminence. Harry Reid was quoted in this documentary saying, "They don't want anyone based on facts. So what they do, ... And here's where I think we need to think harder. Instead of assuming that, well, UAP can do anything to us, but gosh, if we had their technology, we could travel the stars, right? There's such a logical leap there that bridges over a chasm so deep and so wide of other possibilities as well as great risks and hazards. If we set up this conversation that they can do anything and we want what they have so that we can do anything, we will inevitably enter a transactional kind of relationship with whatever this intelligence is. We will want what they have. We will trade for it. We will make allowances for their presence. We will permit access to the planet, to the oceans, to the population, right? And so we have to step out of this default thinking of wanting to be capable of what they appear to be capable of, right? It's somewhat hazardous when you start to want something from someone. It clouds your vision and understanding. I also want to note that, it's almost as if nobody would say alien or extraterrestrial, as if it's not only taboo, but to do so, to say a statement of origin like that would collapse the plausible deniability infrastructure that protects oneself and whatever interests one might have. Why is it so difficult to acknowledge an extraterrestrial origin when we have technological craft moving at speeds of over 40,000 miles per hour, faster than the human eye can even detect, traveling in ways that do suggest certainly interplanetary, if not an interstellar medium of transit? I think at this point we have to acknowledge that there is a strong defensive line being built up around the true nature of a biological extraterrestrial entity, of a biological alien, right? Because to do so triggers a whole cascade of human thinking and human processes that would take this outside the purview of the security state, that would necessitate it being within the international community's purview to decide what to do and how to manage such a presence on Earth. My final thoughts on the age of disclosure. I think it brought forward compelling testimony, but not much else. And so the question is, where is the data going to come to drive forward the disclosure conversation? It's a question, right? How do we back up these claims? I think this documentary was made for a specific audience. Was that the federal community? Was that the mainstream media? Was it to shift the Overton window to allow elected leaders, or to really compel elected leaders to climb further into this issue? If so, I think it was a moderate win, right? This did move this incrementally out into the public domain. It's not going to convince society writ large, but it does provide a little bit more political cover for those in government to take action on this phenomenon and to respond to its real and present risks and hazards. I do think that we have to begin asking, where will the data come to substantiate these claims? And one solution to that I've been a part of standing up is the UAP Summit, uapsummit.org. This is a 2-day virtual conference focused on equipping society with the tools and technologies to detect and to track UAP over our cities, our coastlines, and over sensitive infrastructure. It's open not only to those in government, science, academia, and research, but you, the citizenry. And in fact, I really am hoping that citizens are there at this summit, contributing to the conversation, helping to synergize our disparate efforts to technologically detect UAP and begin to frame out what it would take to create a true coalition of technologists, scientists, and researchers in order to generate an intelligence picture on behalf of the public interest regarding where UAP are appearing, what they are doing, and use that to generate insight into the reasons for their activity, their intent. I think the question is, where does the disclosure conversation go from here? We've heard from current and former government officials. We've heard from whistleblowers. That is important. It's important to corroborate the overall observations of the findings of the phenomenon. I know this film only went so far, and in some ways it can only go that far, right? Because to go even further and to talk about the intent of this intelligence, we break into a whole new brave arena of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Too few are asking, what do they want? Why are they acting in the way they are? What are the signs and patterns of UAP activity that we can use to begin to decode the intent of non-human intelligence. Is this reconnaissance? Is this scientific observation? Is this direct incursion and intervention? These are the questions we need to be asking. Ultimately, we need to be assessing that for the purpose of devising an intelligent, collective human response. It's really more of a human project than a non-human project. The mere presence and existence of non-human intelligence here on Earth sets in train a whole series of critical activities to devise how we human beings are going to manage this presence, how we are going to control the entrance of non-human technologies into the human global system, and basically navigate this in our collective human interest. That's my project. That's the project I'm working with in the Human Institute, an organization out on the front lines of devising critical research and policy formation as it regards to non-human intelligence. Contact has consequences. Disclosure is only the beginning. So let's keep asking the hard questions. Let's decode the intent, and let's not wait for permission to engage our intelligence as a species. So with that, I'll say good luck. Keep endeavoring out on those front lines. Keep asking those hard questions, and I'll see you down the road on Emergent.